The United States and Israel went into Iran, completely eliminated the upper echelons of Iranian leadership. They hit military installations, they hit missile launchers, they hit missile defense capabilities. They basically destroyed every single thing that they wanted to destroy in Iran. But for some reason, the United States is still losing. How does that work? Well, Professor Pape from the University of Chicago has a beautiful framework that explains exactly why Iran is winning. It's called the escalation trap, and in this video I'm going to explain what the escalation trap is and why Trump is in between a rock and a hard place. Why Trump is basically stuck in this war, and it's probably, even though there's now ceasefire negotiations, it's probably not going to stop anytime soon. Let's start the video. So when a strong country like the United States goes into battle, it usually expects a quick and decisive victory. And when that doesn't happen, it's still able to escalate, throwing more bombs, more planes, more tanks at the problem, hoping to eventually solve the problem and win the war. But the problem with deploying that much stuff, basically, that much material, that much political credibility, that much capital at the problem, is that you at some point dig yourself into a quagmire where you're not able to pull out anymore, because you've already dedicated your whole credibility and too much resources in order to tackle that problem, to win that war. That's basically what happened in Vietnam, with the United States sending some advisors to South Vietnam to help in battling the communists in the north. It started with a couple of advisors, and it ended with 58,000 American soldiers dead. That's the risk you take when you keep escalating. And that's how Iran might end. Now, Professor Robert Pape from the University of Chicago developed a framework called the escalation trap that explains this dynamic perfectly. He divides this dynamic into a vertical escalation and horizontal escalation. Let's go through the framework step by step and try to figure out why Iran is winning, even though the United States is much, much stronger. Let's start with vertical escalation. So vertical escalation is basically the idea that you throw more bombs at the problem, deploy more resources, more capital, and just brute forcing the problem, basically. And each step of the ladder, each escalation on the ladder costs more money. Iran cannot win that game. Iran is much, much weaker than the United States. It will not be able to win a pound-for-pound battle against the United States. That's just not what its capabilities. It's just not capable of doing that. The United States is infinitely stronger than Iran. So Iran, instead of facing the United States pound for pound and escalating vertically, Iran needs to be much smarter with its limited amount of resources. So what Iran needs to do is, instead of escalating vertically and battling the United States in a battle of force, it needs to escalate horizontally. Now, horizontal escalation is basically widening the playing field, like a geographic expansion of the battle. It's a widening of the amount of targets, getting more countries involved. That's exactly what it's doing by hitting Kuwait, hitting Bahrain, hitting Saudi Arabia. It hit Azerbaijan. Israel, obviously. Every single country that has American military bases are now being pounded by Iran. That's what's called horizontal escalation, broadening the scope of the war and raising the costs for the opponent. Yes, the United States has a lot more money to deploy, to throw at the problem, but even the United States cannot go on infinitely. That's just not how it works. One example, Iran can send one Shahed drone worth $35,000 at a United States base in, for example, Bahrain. That drone needs to be intercepted in order to avoid casualties and political repercussions back home. It needs to be intercepted, and one of those interceptor missiles, what's the name of that missile? A PAC-3 Patriot missile costs between $3 and $5 million. And you need to send a couple of them to intercept one Shahed drone. If you're lucky, it's just one interceptor drone. So that's $35,000 against millions of dollars. That's an easy formula for Iran. They developed algebra, they're good at math. But even if they weren't, they would understand that flinging Shaheds at American bases in the region would be an easy way to deplete American assets, interceptors in the region. So by broadening the scope of the war, horizontally escalating, the United States Iran is pulling the United States further and further into the quagmire. Iran might be losing every single battle, but it can raise the costs for the United States to such an extent that it's forcing political repercussions at home. If the United States starts spending hundreds of billions, which is already happening, let's say trillions of dollars on this war, people at home will be asking, hey, why don't we have healthcare? Why does our infrastructure suck? And we're battling some country in the Middle East? What's happening? Why are we doing this? So there will be repercussions, political repercussions for Trump. And this is an election year, so he has to take into consideration the repercussions of spending so much capital in the Middle East. So that's horizontal escalation, broadening the scope, the geographic scope, the amount of targets, and just the sheer amount of capital that your enemy is spending. America is escalating vertically, Iran is escalating horizontally. And so this is Iran's strategy. It cannot win pound for pound, but it can broaden the scope of the war to such an extent that it becomes too costly for the United States. So what Iran is doing is, it's not retaliating, it's deploying a much more sophisticated strategy, an asymmetric strategy that makes the war too costly for the United States. And so, according to Professor Pape, what's happening now is that because of the fact that Iran is winning, the United States doesn't want to deploy more capital, more resources into the war because it's politically too sensitive. Iran has basically forced a win in this war. They gained control over the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's oil supply flows through that strait. It might not own that oil, but it has complete control over the transit. That's why it's charging a toll for vessels that transit through the strait. Reportedly, it's $1 just $1 per barrel of oil that goes through. A tanker can carry between 2 million to 3 million barrels in one tanker, and it's reportedly between 100 and 150 tankers go through that strait every single day. Forget about gas, we're just talking about oil. So that's tens of billions of dollars of revenue. But that's which can be deployed to reconstruct its economy. But that's not even the important part. The important part is it's not the money, it's the fact that it has control over this territory. According to Professor Pape, Iran went from the 20th most powerful country on the planet to 4th after the United States, China, and Russia. Iran is now controls over 20% of the world's oil supply through the Strait of Hormuz, $75 to $100 billion in revenue coming in annually, which flows directly to Chinese banks in yuan, not in dollars. That's a whole nother story. It's not trading in dollars because of all the sanctions. So it's also chipping away at the dominance of the US dollar. That's a whole nother video. It's on the cusp of developing nuclear weapons with the harshness of the attack that it endured from the United States and Israel. Iran is now probably racing towards a nuclear weapon, so it'll probably become a nuclear or a country with nuclear weapons, with nuclear capabilities. Imagine, this whole war started with the idea that Iran should never have nuclear weapons, and now they're probably, there's no evidence, probably racing to build a nuclear weapon as fast as possible. So it's on the cusp of developing nuclear weapons, and this war showed the extent of Iran's power to the degree where the United States needs to position its Navy vessels more than 1,000 miles away from Iranian shores. 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers away, because they just don't know how or when or where Iran is going to send missiles or drones or whatever kind of weapons toward the vessels to sink them. Obviously, the United States is not going to send its military vessel, its Navy vessels, its ships to the Strait of Hormuz, because they'll be blown up immediately. Reminds me, Trump asked his NATO allies to send ships to the Strait of Hormuz to secure it, even though he can't even secure it. He's keeping his ships 1,600 kilometers away from Iran. And so that's the amount of power Iran has gained in this war, just by escalating horizontally instead of battling the United States vertically in a pound-for-pound war. Keep in mind, Iran says it has 80,000 drones in reserve. It's been preparing for this war for 50 years. 80,000 drones in reserves. And the United States, that will cost so much money. It will cost so much money to defend against that many drones. Hundreds of billions just in interceptors. Just in interceptors. And that's like a small part of the equation. That the United States, and they're still producing them. They're still producing the drones. This will be probably the most costly war the United States has ever fought. So the economic asymmetry here is just, it's baffling. I never use that word, baffling. That's a good word. And so this is Trump's dilemma. He can either give up, lose his credibility, lose the elections this year, and go into history as the first president ever to be defeated by a smaller power. Yes, the United States lost multiple wars. It lost Afghanistan. it won every single battle, but it eventually retreated and the Taliban took over. Yes, it lost in Vietnam, but never did it lose this quickly and this embarrassingly after deploying such a huge amount of force. The United States used more interceptors in the first 2 weeks of the war in Iran than it has sent to Ukraine to use against Russia in 4 years of war. Let that sink in. It used more interceptors in the first 2 weeks than Ukraine has used in 4 years. So the United States threw everything it has into this war. So if it loses, Trump is basically screwed because the political repercussions are, well, I can't even imagine what kind of repercussions. He will probably be impeached. He'll lose the Congress. The Democrats will try to impeach him. So he's in between a rock and a hard place. That's the escalation trap. You're trapped. You either have to escalate and hope that you win, but if you don't win, you've deployed more resources, and then the embarrassment and the ramifications will be much more severe. Or you give up now and deal with the consequences now. But you'll probably escalate because you're afraid for the ramifications. So escalate hoping to win. But if you lose higher up on the escalation ladder, you're even more screwed. That's Trump's dilemma. Let me end this video with Professor Pape's advice to Trump. What he said, and I'm paraphrasing, this is not literally what he said. You better end this war as fast as possible. Because if you keep escalating, you're basically digging a deeper grave for yourself. Trump is better off accepting whatever terms Iran dictates now, even though it's already really embarrassing to lose against Iran. But if he keeps escalating and loses in the future, the repercussions will be even more severe. But what I'm afraid of personally, honestly, is he might just think, you know what, let me drag this war on, let this war drag on, and let the next president deal with it. If the Republicans lose, let the Democrats pull out. So he's in between a rock and a hard place, Trump. He's stuck on the escalation ladder. That's what Professor Pape calls the escalation trap. Trump is stuck on the escalation trap. So that was the video for today, guys. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you later.